Okay, so I gave you all this sheet a while ago. And this sheet tells you how to kind of perform all of your strategies. Okay, so we started with, well, if you have one variable, you can isolate it, right? You can get it alone. If you have two variables, instantly you have to, what? Remember, if you have two variables, the very first thing before you even try anything is to get a 0 on one side, right? Then we said, once we have the 0 on one side, we look to factor. So we knew we had a GCF, simple trinomial, complex trinomial, or different squares. Okay, those were our factoring types. Now, today we're going to learn, sometimes they don't factor. If they don't factor, this formula is what we can use. So you can obviously see on this one with my answers 8.32, negative 1.32, da-da-da, this is why they're not factoring. Okay, they're not going to be nice, pretty numbers like we've been having. Okay, but the formula actually always works. Like I can still use the formula for this. Even though it factors, I can still use the formula. Okay. So here's our first example. Solve first by factoring, and then we're going to solve with the formula, and we're going to see if they work out and match each other. Okay, so this is a simple trinomial. So let's see. X and x multiplies to 12, makes a 4 in the middle. So 6 and 2, we need a negative 4. So make a negative 4 out of your numbers. So the result would be x equals 6 and x equals negative 2. Okay, now let's see if we can get the same answer using the formula. Can you tell me in this equation what the value for A is, B, and C? What is the A number?
1.
Just 1, because that's how many x squared you have. B is negative 4, and C is negative 12. Okay, so x equals negative b, so I write the opposite. So I would go plus 4 instead of negative 4, plus or minus the square root of, okay, what is b squared? We're going to do it, not write it, we're going to just do it. What is this squared? 16. And the reason I just do it is because I get lots of people who make the mistake there, because people make the mistake. If I was to write it in, which one is correct out of these? This one, option A, or option B is the correct one here? How would I have written it? This one. And people make that mistake, so I say, why don't you just put 16 so you don't make that mistake? So b squared, subtract 4 times the 1 times negative 12. All of it gets divided by 2 times 1. Okay, now I'm going to go 4 plus or minus the square root of something divided by 2. So I got to get that number, and I'm just going to get my calculator out for that. Okay, so 16 subtract 4 times 1 times negative 12. Or you don't really need to do the 1 on that. And I get 64. Okay, the most important thing when we're doing this is typing into our calculators. That's where the problems start happening. Okay, so this is what I'm going to do. 4 plus root 64 divided by 2. And if I type it in like this, there's going to be a problem.
You'll get one of your answers.
I won't get one of my answers. There's still a problem. What's going to be the problem with how I'm typing this in? Think about BEDMAS. What's your calculator going to do? It's going to do this. So how do I make it do the top divided by? Brackets. Okay. So that, how I wrote it there is how you have to type it in. You have to have brackets or it'll cause an error there. So brackets all that divided by 2 equals, we actually knew what the answers are going to be, right? Or hopefully. Okay, and then Valley said one of our other problems is that it only will give one answer. So I'm going to do this all over again. Okay, so I'm going to go 4 subtract root 64. So I actually have to do it twice. The one time in there I'm going to add them, and then the one time I'm going to subtract them. Okay, and then brackets again, have to have brackets. Or the other option would be pushing equals and then dividing by 2. And does it come out to what we wanted it to? Okay, so we're going to talk about the word discriminant. Okay, so you're going to hear me say that word, discriminant. And the discriminant is this number right here. What is b squared minus 4ac? That is the discriminant. So in this question, our discriminant was 64. So 64 was the discriminant. And how many answers did I end up getting? I got 2 answers. Okay. So here's why. If you discriminate and you square root a positive number, you're going to have plus, minus, you're going to get 2 solutions. Right? Because if you add a number or subtract a number, that's going to cause 2 different things to happen. Okay, what if your discriminant was 0? What is the square root of 0? It's just 0. What happens if you are doing a number plus 0 as one option and that number minus 0 as your other option? Is it going to create 2 different things at the end? Think about 10 plus 0 and 10 minus 0 or something like that. What is this result? 10. What's this result? 10. Are those 2 different values? No. So if your discriminant is 0 and it's going to work out to a plus 0 and a minus 0, you're only going to get 1 value. Okay, what happens if the discriminant is a negative? What happens to us in math when we go to square root a negative number. Error. It doesn't work. So how many solutions we're going to have? No solution. Okay, so that's what this is all talking about. Okay, so what does a quadratic, which is a parabola graph, what does it look like if it has two solutions? It has two x-intercepts. What does a parabola look like if it has one x-intercept? Right, this one only has one. And if the discriminant is negative, what could be going on? How many times will this ever cross this? It won't. It has no x-intercepts. That's what it means. Do you see visually? This thing is never going to cross. Okay, how many solutions are there going to be? So all I want to know is just that part. What is just the discriminant? Okay, I don't want to know the whole formula. I just am trying to figure out just the little square root part. Okay, what should I replace b squared with? Can anybody do that number in their head or know that one? Does anybody know the 12 squared number? 144. 144. Subtract 4 times a 5 times a negative 3. Okay, so that's what I have going on in my calculator. 144 subtract a 4 times a 5 times a negative 3 equals 204. So what does our page say there? What do we think? If that's going to be positive and then we go to square root it, how many answers are we going to have at the end of this? We're going to have two solutions, two x-intercepts. Okay, same thing. Tell me what that is. So b squared, so 100, subtract 4 times a 5 times a 16. Did we get negative 220? So what does that tell me? Because in the formula, if I put it in there, I'd be square rooting that negative number. And in my calculator, we're just having error. So then there's not going to be a possible solution. Okay, and the last one. What's going on? So 100 is the b squared, because 10 squared. Subtract 4 times the 5 in the front times the 5 in the back. You do your math on that in your calculator. Did you get 0? Okay, so think about putting that into your formula. So into the formula, you would be having plus or minus the square root of 0, which is irrelevant. You're not going to change anything. So you're going to have one solution. Okay, state the solution. So we know this was the first one. We know that there's going to be two answers. So what are they? Okay, so x equals negative b, so that's a 12, plus or minus the square root of, and you know what, we already did that part, right? Are you okay if I plug in the 204 there? We already did the work. We already did all that b squared minus 4ac. All of it gets divided by 2 times 5, 2a. So here's my calculator. I'm going to do this. Okay, so that's exactly how you have to type it into your calculator, which is the most important thing, just understanding how to type it. Okay, and then again, and then on that one, instead of the add, you're going to subtract. So see if everybody can type it in properly, and then we'll look and see if we match. Okay, is anybody matching? To get some matches? Okay, I'm going to show you what this looks like. So this is what we do in applied math. My grade 11 applieds, we're learning the same thing. So I'm going to go y equals 5x squared minus 12x minus 3. Okay, so I type the equation in, and I'm going to graph it. And what should it make? A parabola. Do you see the parabola? Okay, so I want to know what's this number, where it's crossing the x-axis, and what's that number. So I tell my calculator to find the 0. It's called a 0. And then I move my mouse left, right, enter, and I get negative 0.23. It just got it for me, and that was our answer. And then I say, calculator, find this 0, so I contain it, put my mouse left, right, so it's in between there, 2.63. Okay, so that's what it looks like. Okay, so that's what's going on. Okay, next one. So x equals negative b, so negative 10, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. Are we okay that we already did that? Because this is the same question there. We already did all that. So that was 0 over 2 times 5. Okay, do we understand math that this is irrelevant? Adding, subtracting 0, it's going to do nothing. So what is negative 10 divided by 10? We can do that one in our heads. Should be negative 1. Okay, so if I was a applied math, I would type this in. What does my parabola look like? And where do you think it hits the x-axis? At negative 1. Okay, so on your test, I might get you to just draw me a super simple sketch like this. Like, what does this number mean? What does this number mean to you when you look at a parabola? Okay? And I also knew that this parabola opened in which direction? Slope of 5, so I knew it opened up, and I knew it had an x-intercept. Okay, the last two examples. I want to figure out what number I could put into my equation in order to have one solution. Okay, so remember the rule? To have one solution, what has to go on? The discriminant has to equal 0, right? The discriminant will have to equal 0. That was the rule. To have one answer, that would have to be the rule. Okay, so b squared is 144. Subtract 4 times 4 times k. Because I don't know the c, right? The c is the thing I'm trying to figure out. Okay, this is the part that seems to catch people. How could I rewrite this term? Because this is all glued together. Can you make it look nicer somehow? What could you do with that? 16? Right? Because it's all glued together, so we could put the 4 times the 4 together. What kind of math do you want to do here? We're doing isolation stuff, so what do you want to do? What do you want to move? Should we move that to that side? So 144 equals 16k. Divide by 16. I feel like that might be 9, but yep. So I would need that k number to be a 9. Okay, the last one. This time I want to end up with 2 solutions. So what was the rule to have 2 solutions? The discriminant needed to be positive. It needed to be positive. So how do I write positive using math? Do you know what this would mean? Do you know that symbol? It means greater than 0. So greater than is bigger than 0, so that's positive. Okay, so b squared, that's a 144. Subtract 4 times a 3 times a k. Greater than 0. So same kind of ideas there. I'm going to put that together more nicely. So I could make that a 12k. Okay, I'm going to work the same here. I'm going to move that. So 144 is greater than 12k. Divide. Okay, how would you read, this is fine to write it like that, but how would you read this to me? You would probably want to read it, k is what? What kind of word would you put there? K is? If I flipped it around, k is being pointed to. So how, if I flipped it, right, the k is getting pointed to. So how would you read it like that? K is less than 12. Because 12 is greater than k, so k is less than 12. Okay, some of you, if you had, I just want to make note of this. Hopefully, maybe you just won't do this, but If somebody had moved the 144, that's fine. But here's a little trick in math. If you're ever working with inequalities and you divide by a negative value, it flip-flops your sign. So that's just something, if you do that in algebra, that's what happens. Dividing or timesing by negative numbers within an inequality makes your sign change in a direction. Okay, so that's just a simple math rule that's always applies. It's something you just always have to remember.